Carl had no trouble recognizing his employer. He had been killed. There was no need to be a detective to figure that out. But only a detective could have noticed that the killer had to have been very close, that the fatal blow had been given before the victim even realized. An explosion suddenly occurred outside. The crowbar was stuck under the lift. Notwithstanding Carl's imposing stature, car lifting wasn't part of his skill set yet. The crowbar was stuck under the lift. Notwithstanding Carl's imposing stature, car lifting wasn't part of his skill set. Hate was in the air. Seems like some villagers barely tolerated each other. The crowbar was stuck under the lift. Notwithstanding Carl's imposing stature, car lifting wasn't part of his skill set yet. Carl was used to strange phenomena, but a chunk of ice like this, as if an iceberg came out of the ground, that was a first. Prince? Carl found a surprise at every turn. Was the camera faulty, or was there a possible lead? Carl felt that the store and its surroundings still held their secrets, and he didn't like to miss out. Carl wondered what the hell could that thing be. It looked like a man fossilized in ice. All of a sudden, Carl felt like he was pulled inside a world of dreams, a cold, unknown dimension. Somehow, self-control was slipping from his grasp. To all appearances, this was a hunting log. Better yet, a war diary. could these engraved numbers mean? A fresh path suddenly appeared before Carl. Carl had that feeling you get when you immerse your frozen hands in hot water. What happened? Now at least he knew who the unfortunate man petrified in ice was. Gilles Lachance, the general store's manager himself. That had to be the worst parking job ever. Who was Carl to judge, though? It may be customary to park like that around these parts. Or not. The pumps wouldn't surrender their divine nectar so easily. In all likelihood, they had to be switched on from inside the store. What could be inside that envelope? Carl was taken aback. He knew this address. It was said to be the address of the P.O. box for the Canadian Secret Service. Carl knew that Gilles Lachance was in charge of the general store. That made him one of Hamilton's employees. A very angry employee, as Carl could plainly see. place needed to be secured. The killer had to be found, and fast. What if Gilles Lachance had turned words into deeds? The murder weapon. What was that doing there, Carl wondered. Hamilton must have been determined to keep some information secret to post this key. Shame he got unlucky. Everything made sense now. Poor Hamilton's denunciation was interrupted, and he figured it would be best to lock everything up and send the key to his correspondent, who would receive the box later on. Clever, but not enough. That's what happens to ordinary people playing spy. Carl, ever diligent in his work, always carried his log on, in which he scribbled down thoughts and leads alike during the course of his investigations. In spite of Dr. Beaupré's goodwill, the place didn't look much like a physician's office. It could easily be mistaken for a sewing shop. There should be a law forbidding doctors from falling sick. A communist manifesto. Only a few years ago, this type of allegiance meant prison time. And even at present, the Western world was very wary of the Soviet threat. Why would the doctor own such a book? Carl got the trembles as he imagined the excruciating pain that kind of scalpel could no doubt inflict. Within these miserable walls, patients probably felt more like in a slaughterhouse than in a doctor's office. For the one-eyed, or for other vision problems, the eye patch was the way to go. Someone had lost a few liters of blood here. Carl's first thought had been a lumber accident, someone's hand cut by a saw, or a hunting accident. In any case, whoever had lost all this blood couldn't have gone far. Perhaps they were already dead. The good doctor, flanked by his beautiful spouse. Pure happiness, captured on cardstock. Carl recognized this woman's soulful eyes. Was it Dr. Beaupré who had hit him head-on at the village border? Nobody kills a rich patient to start a revolution. It didn't make any sense. He had to dig deeper still to understand. Luckily, that was Carl Faubert's specialty. Great care had to be taken searching this place full of oddities. Everything was important. The decor itself told a story.
Oh, mon bonhomme! Je m'attendais pas à ce qu'un étrange retontisse par ici. Moi te dire, je prends plus de chance depuis que ça rôde dans ce bout-là. J'ai ma carabine au bout du doigt, et puis bang, 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 si ça s'approche. Hé, la Corriveau, Batèche, ça te passe l'envie de te marier, la Corriveau. Elle tuait tous ses maris, squick, les uns après les autres. Et dans le mariage. Touche pas à ça, l'enfant, tu pourrais te faire mal. Ben oui. Peux-tu tout faire en même temps, toi? Si tu veux du linge chaud, parce que t'es habillé comme une bonne bouteille de caribou, puis tu pigeras ce que tu voudras parmi mes guenilles.
To enrich body and mind. Carl couldn't leave empty-handed. That truck had obviously seen its share of gravel roads. Carl wasn't a mechanic, but he could easily tell that only the most heartfelt prayer would bring this old beater back from its slumber. With that cold, however, it was more likely that it would wait until next spring to wake up. The place looked more like a pigsty than a house. A heavy stench of curdled milk, cheap alcohol, and boiled cauliflower filled the air. Back then, in Africa and elsewhere, people were ready to take up arms to stand against the yoke of English imperialism. In Montreal, mailboxes were blown up, abductions were carried out, and violent manifestos were distributed to media outlets. But around here, in the great northernmost, all a man could do is curse out loud against a faraway evil and pray for the revolution to arise. That man, by any reckoning, was from that very stock. You had to be out of your mind to cook up white whiskey at home. The all-surrounding stench of alcohol alone was probably enough to gas a man to death. Rock music invaded the minds of men even in the remotest of places. The man didn't own a turntable, though, so there's that going for him. If Carl had at any point wished to get his hands on some caribou, he couldn't have wished for better than a distillery like this one. Carl, like many of his contemporaries, felt like he had more trouble breathing when he wasn't smoking. Cigarette was his own personal breathing assistant. An axe, not too shabby. Carl felt he needed to protect himself. Good was a motorless car. The mechanic sure had an odd way to go about repairing things. The milk was sorted by color, from the whitest to the greenest, or in other words, from the freshest to the sourest. Perhaps someone was expecting an important call. In any case, that person's in for a long wait. Carl already noticed that telephone services weren't provided in this area. These scribblings were undoubtedly the mark of a tormented mind. Something wasn't right in the poor mechanic's head. Something very important must have been in there for the man to take such time and effort to hide it. But Carl didn't know how to reach it. It was so cold. Already Carl did not feel his toes anymore. Carl had a hunch that there had got to be a plan somewhere that could help him put this thing back together. Carl had a hunch that there had got to be a plan somewhere that could help him put this thing back together. Carl had no idea how to interpret a message like that. On the surface, it seemed like he had one half too many of this puzzle. Enough to know he shouldn't take this testimony as gospel. The entire thing being some punishment for a murder committed by Hamilton. Carl was doubtful. Carl still wasn't done with the mechanic's place. Carl deducted this was a map of the area. Were those pins pointing to places of interest? Roswell, Atamipek, same story. Large deserts conducive to extravagant follies. Weird stuff. Kind of a crossing between a colander and a hairdryer. What was it for? To play telepath? To protect against nuclear waves? Carl had a hunch that there had got to be a plan somewhere that could help him put this thing back together. Sheets of metal everywhere. Was Carl out of touch with current home improvement trends? Or perhaps this was meant to protect against residual radiation? Gamma rays? The machine appeared to be missing something critical, something necessary for it to take off. The shape of this machine, almost straight out of Star Trek, was out of the ordinary, to say the least. It felt like this thing could fly up into space at any moment. The very first steps of man on the moon were made more than a year ago. The event had surely captivated the mechanic's mind for him to still keep this around. Well, this truck's not going anywhere. Where were the amputated parts? Carl grinned as he pictured a Frankenstein-esque car lying around somewhere made of parts from a dozen different vehicles. Carl never thought he would be dancing with the wolves. It was so cold. Already Carl did not feel his toes anymore. The Polaroid, Carl's long-standing and faithful ally, has seen its share of husbands caught red-handed cheating. There's always something out there waiting to be snapped away. By following the plan, Carl was led to believe that the snowmobile's parts had to be scattered about in the vicinity.